All right. Welcome, everybody. This is our monthly evening meeting for the Prairie State Humanists. You know, we used to be able to say this is our monthly meeting, but now we have 7 events a month. We have just coming up tomorrow, we've got the Humanist virtual lunch. So it starts at 1 p.m. So you can choose whether or not to have a late lunch crunching into your microphone on a Zoom call tomorrow, or you can eat before the meeting. Hopefully you can make it. It's just a general chat forum where people can join a Zoom meeting and talk about current events, what's going on with your lives and your interests, etc. So that's tomorrow. You can find out more information about that on our meetup page and in our newsletter. And I'm sure you all know about one or both of those because you're here tonight. So that's our program for tomorrow, one of 7 monthly programs. We also have twice a month, we have Science Sunday, and that's a thematic science topic that we delve into starting at noon on the 1st and 3rd Sundays of the month. This coming Sunday, we will have a special guest, Mike Werner, who was a co-founder of this humanist chapter, is going to be back in the Chicago area briefly, helping one of his children with house moving, I think, or at least furniture moving or some sort of moving. And anyway, Mike Werner will be presenting Science Sunday to us this coming Sunday. He will be talking about evolutionary psychology. That should be very interesting topic. Prior to that, on Saturday, we've got sidewalk science. Also, the information for that is in Meetup and the newsletter. And we're trying to do at least somewhat of a thematic approach for sidewalk science as well. The theme for this coming Saturday is going to be As the Muon Spins. So we're going to be talking about some of the recent discoveries about the elementary particle called the muon. And that happens twice a month as well. So that's 4 plus 5 is the lunch. 6 is this meeting, and then we also have a book club. The book club for this month has already happened. It has a varying format. Sometimes it'll be a presentation, 1 or more presentations about a book, a particular book. Sometimes it's more of an open forum. Bring your own book, talk about it, tell people why you liked it, etc. So we hope to be pretty active, and we hope that we have at least 1, if not 7 programs that you find interesting and appealing. The American Humanist Association also has many ongoing activities. I encourage you to check out the American Humanist Association website for further information about their programs and activities as well, many of which are free. Right, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm really looking forward to this evening's program, but I'm not going to talk a lot about it because we have an expert to talk to us about it. To introduce our expert is a friend and fellow board member for the Prairie State Humanists, Stephanie Downs Hughes. So Stephanie?
All right, well, thank you, Scott. All of us are here tonight because we're interested in ethics. We care about ethics in government. And that has to do with the rules our officials make or are made for them, the rules they follow or don't follow, how they behave, how they conduct themselves, and it's about our expectations of them and of the system. So we'll be thinking and talking about government at various levels, close to home here in DuPage County and our surrounding counties, the state level and federal level. Unfortunately, our state has a reputation of being not so honest. We have been listed as one of the 3 most corrupt states in the union. So we do have plenty to examine and work on tonight. And to help us do this, we have invited a very knowledgeable person who's been delving into these issues for a long time. I have known her since, I think it was 2016 when I joined Represent Us, but I think she's been involved a lot longer than that. Her name is Donna Limper, and she is with the nation's largest grassroots anti-corruption organization called Represent Us, all run together. Represent Us is a transpartisan or a multi-partisan or a non-partisan organization. It is focused on uniting voters across the political spectrum to fight corruption at all of those levels. So with the progress that has been made recently there is a understandable, visible anti-corruption movement now nationwide, and there's momentum for democracy reform. A lot of people feel that democracy needs to be shaped, evolved, grown. And the For the People Act represents probably the best opportunity that we've had in decades to work on this. Let me tell you a little bit about Donna Limper herself. She is on the leadership team of Represent Us for the DuPage County chapter. She's got an undergraduate degree in business administration from the University of Illinois and a Master of Management from Northwestern University. Professionally, she's worked in financial research and public relations, nonprofit fundraising, and education. And the Citizen Advocacy Center recognized her valuable contributions in 2019, bestowing upon her a Citizen Initiative Award. And the League of Women Voters values her enormously. She is now working with the Illinois state level of the League of Women Voters. She serves as the Money in Politics Issues and Advocacy Specialist. So without further ado, let me introduce my much respected friend, Donna Limper.
Good evening. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to address the DuPage humanists about government ethics. Ethics reform plays a critical role in the anti-corruption movement. Surveys by Pew Research Center indicate that public trust in government is near historic lows. Only 17% of Americans trust the federal government to do what's right just about always, and only 1 in 4 Illinois residents are confident in Illinois state government. That is the lowest among the 50 states by a significant margin. I'll begin with a study by Princeton and Northwestern University political scientists, which looked at more than 20 years worth of data to answer a simple question: who influences government policy? This graph summarizes the study findings. The x-axis represents public support for a policy from 0% all the way up to 100%. And the y-axis represents the likelihood of a policy becoming law, again from 0% to 100%. In an ideal republic, the more popular an idea is, the more likely it is to become law, and the less popular, the less likely, as shown by this black ideal representation line. But the reality of American politics is, no matter how popular or unpopular an idea is with the public, there is a 30% chance it will become law. Public sentiment's influence is flat, as represented by this gray line, or statistically non-significant. However, when economic elites, which are defined as the top 10% of income earners in America, businesses, and lobbyists, when they want something, it is much more likely to happen. That's represented by this yellow elite representation line. And if they don't want something to happen, look at 0.00. They have the power to completely block it from happening. An example of this study in action is net neutrality. Net neutrality requires internet service providers to fairly distribute internet access. In June 2018, the FCC controversially repealed the Net Neutrality Act. The repeal occurred despite over 2 million public comments against repeal and polling by the University of Maryland that indicated that 83% of Americans across party lines support net neutrality. The level of corruption we see today has its roots in decades past. In the 1960s and 70s, the US government undertook a vast regulatory expansion. The Environmental Protection Agency was formed, OSHA was formed, they passed the Consumer Bill of Rights, and the American business community was not happy and they organized to fight back. By 1971, future Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, pictured here, he wrote a memo that galvanized business circles. He stated, and I quote from the memo, "The American economic system is under broad attack. Business must learn the lesson that political power is necessary and must be used aggressively in the scale of financing available only through joint effort." This graph from Open Secrets shows the increase in the total cost of elections, both congressional, which is represented by these blue bars here, and presidential, which are the gold additions to the bar. The total cost of the 2020 election was nearly $14 billion, making it the most expensive election in history. That figure is further explained by these statistics. The candidate with the most money wins 70 to 90% of the time, depending on the race. In 2020, the average winning Senate candidate spent over $27 million on his campaign. And members of Congress spend 30 to 70% of their time fundraising. Former Congressman Rick Nolan said, "I could give you the names of people who said, you know, I'd like to go to Washington to help fix problems, but I don't want to run for Congress to become a mid-level telemarketer." Party dues are an important component of fundraising. Party dues are what each member of Congress is expected to pay their party. Current campaign rules place no limits on what a member can transfer to a party committee. When a freshman Congress member arrives in Washington, party leadership tells them how much they should raise for party dues, giving them a donor list and also a room with a telephone. In 2013, the press got a hold of a model daily schedule given to a freshman congressperson, and you can see the suggestion that they spend only 2 hours a day actually legislating. Party leadership says dues are voluntary and that higher profile members can raise money for less well-known members. However, it's common knowledge that there's a correlation between higher dues and higher committee assignments. A study conducted by the Sunlight Foundation found that serving on the Ways and Means Committee, the Financial Services, Commerce, and Energy Committees allow an improved ability to solicit donations. And those committees have jurisdiction over tax policy, banking and securities policy, and energy policy. And those are all areas to which a substantial number of corporations want access. Rising election costs don't even reflect the influence of outside spending. Outside spending is political expenditures independent of candidate committees that are used to try and sway voters like you and me. In January 2010, the Supreme Court held in a controversial 5-4 decision that political spending is protected under the First Amendment, freedom of speech. The Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission decision allowed corporations and unions to spend unlimited amounts of money on political activities as long as there's no direct contribution to a political party or candidate. This graph, also sourced from Open Secrets, shows outside spending from 1990 all the way to last year. And you can see that outside spending, it was always a factor, but here is 2010, and you can see the kick up in outside spending. And Citizens United just leased an unprecedented level of outside spending. Outside spending is often dark money. Dark money is a term that's used to refer to non-transparent funds spent independently of campaigns to influence elections. You don't know where that money's coming from. In addition to elections, funds are spent to cast the government as the enemy of the people rather than its democratic representation. Dark money can flow to think tanks and academic programs, advocacy groups and lobbyists, synthetic grassroots groups, legal groups to work the courts, and model state legislation. To better understand the incredible influence of dark money, we recommend reading the book Dark Money by Jane Meyer. Open Secrets quantified dark money spending as exceeding $1 billion in the 2020 elections. Ironically, Democrats, who largely advocate for bolstering transparency, were the ones who benefited the most in 2020. Open Secrets found that liberal dark money groups spent $514 million in 2020 compared to $200 million spent by conservative groups. If I had one message I'd like to convey today, is that corruption is not party specific, but flows to the party and the people in power. Represent Us predicates its work on the understanding that corruption is legal in America, and we need to work to make it illegal. Corruption takes many forms, and so I want to look at a few examples in case you're not familiar with them. The first, personal money and direct exchange for favors, is both illegal and very rare. But there are other less direct forms of corruption that are very commonly practiced. Campaign spending and donations in exchange for favorable policy is illegal, but it's so hard to prove that there's really a connection that it might as well be legal. Outside spending threats to launch a smear campaign against politicians has a new term, and you might have heard of this. It's called being primaried. It sounds like this: if you don't vote the way we tell you to vote, you will face a well-funded opponent in your next primary. Payment later in exchange for favors now is characterized by the term the revolving door. The revolving door is the promise of a lucrative job offer after a politician leaves office. To put this in perspective, in 1970, only 3% of retiring congresspeople became lobbyists, but now 50% of senators and 42% of House representatives become lobbyists once they leave office. Members of Congress who become lobbyists can see their salaries increase on average 1,452%. The revolving door is a very effective form of legal bribery. Corruption is difficult to dislodge because it's enormously profitable. Open the Books is a libertarian government watchdog. Their auditors quantified corporate government dealings from 2014 to 2017, and during that 4-year period, the top 10 Fortune 100 companies receiving the most federal funding saw a return on investment on lobbying of $1,000 for every dollar spent on lobbying. During that 4-year period, 8 Fortune 100 companies who received $17.9 billion in federal funding paid absolutely 0% in income taxes. And so that's where that term corporate welfare comes from. Represent Us is a founding member of the National Association of Non-Partisan Reformers, otherwise known as NANNER. The coalition's reform initiative are outlined in this book, The Politics Industry by Gellin Porter. This is a wonderful book if you really are interested in this topic. Catherine Gell is a former CEO, a food CEO, and Michael Porter is a Harvard Business School professor. They believe the two-party system is failing America. They believe the two-party duopoly is focused on protecting itself and is dragging the US down on many economic measures. In their view, major party candidates are chosen to appeal to their party's extremists because those are the people most likely to vote in primaries. This process tends to produce candidates who are either beholden to special interests or who in fact support their party's most extreme views. As Gellin Porter put it, the parties compete on tribal ideology, not on solutions to our nation's problems. Bipartisan compromise like we had in the 80s and 90s will get you primaried. In addition, our election system inhibits competition. Third-party candidates and independents face enormous hurdles just to get on the ballot. This quote from the authors discusses reform from the middle. Eventually, change must be enacted by a majority in democratically elected legislative bodies. It is here that bipartisan, problem-solving, consensus-seeking moderates are crucial for delivering practical solutions. On March 8th, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 1 with no Republican support. Represent Us considers the For the People Act the most impactful anti-corruption bill in 50 years. Corruption is a very complex problem, and Represent Us has always advocated for a comprehensive solution. You cannot fight corruption with a bill here and a bill there. H.R. 1 is about 800 pages long. The act has three main parts: protect voting rights and safety so all voices can be heard and election infrastructure is efficient and secure; fix campaign financing so politicians are beholden to voters; strengthen ethics rules and enforcement to curb corruption. The companion piece, known as S1, had its first committee hearing on March 24th. The hearing underscored the stark division between Democratic support for the bill and universal Republican opposition. Both parties assert that support for and opposition against the act are related to partisan power grabs. The hearing made it clear that passing the act will require limiting or eliminating the 60-vote filibuster. I think it's important to note that since Democrats took power over all three chambers, Republican state legislators have introduced 361 election security bills in 47 different states. On the Democratic side, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has labeled SR 1 and discussed it as, "We have an existential threat to democracy on our hands." Most Democrats view eliminating the filibuster as a choice between either protecting minority civil rights or protecting the rights of the minority party to shape public policy. On the Republican side, Mitch McConnell has labeled the bill a solution in search of a problem. He said that states are not engaging in efforts to suppress voters whatsoever. During the hearing, Republicans called GOP Secretary of State Mac Warner of West Virginia to testify. He insisted that H.R. 1S1 would stomp on states' rights. Mr. Warner's opposition is viewed as key to swaying his state's senior senator, Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin is the only Democrat who has not sponsored S1 and is also the most prominent opponent to weakening the filibuster. A January poll by Data for Progress and Equal Citizens showed the public was behind H.R. 1S1. In January, 67% of national voters supported it, 56% of Republicans, 68% of independents, and 77% of Democratic voters supported it. However, in just March alone, big money groups have committed more than $10 million on a misinformation smear campaign aimed at the For the People Act. Good government groups are increasingly concerned about the flood of restrictive election laws. Momentum for these election security bills has been growing in Republican-run battleground states that have large shares of Black and Latina voters. Authors of these bills say their motives is to boost election security, even though an exhaustive search turned up no consequential evidence of fraud in the 2020 election. Some good government groups want to separate the voting rights portion of HR 1. However, most good government groups believe that current voter suppression tactics plus Democratic control of Washington have created a rare opportunity to push the entire package. Let's take a look at the Act's components so you can decide for yourself whether you think it's partisan. I'm just going to give you some highlights broken down by the 3 key sections, because remember, this is 800 pages. If you want to dive deep into it, I highly recommend the Brennan Center for Justice. I've kind of lifted it up here. They're at the part of the New York University's law school. And and Common Cause also has excellent annotated guides to the entire Act. The voting rights and safety section would allow online and same-day voter registration, expand early voting and simplify absentee voting, make Election Day a federal holiday, restore voting rights to people with prior felony convictions. Sometimes you might hear that referred to as prison gerrymandering. Prohibit voter purges that kick eligible voters off registration rolls, like was done in Wisconsin prior to the election. Enhance election security with a paper-based voting system and more oversight over election vendors. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have an oligopoly over our election vendors. There are only 3 private companies that produce our election machines. Interestingly enough, one of them is suing Trump for protesting the election. And then ending, sorry? I'm sorry, did someone have a question?
No, I think that was just background noise.
Okay. End partisan gerrymandering by establishing independent redistricting commissions, and prohibit providing false information about the election process. The campaign finance section would reduce the influence of big money in our politics. The first 2 bits enhance transparency. So dealing with dark money, require organizations that spend money in elections to disclose their donors, and upgrade online political spending transparency rules. It would create a small donor-focused public financing matching system so candidates for Congress aren't just reliant on big money donors. It would strengthen oversight rules to ensure those who break our campaign finance laws are held accountable. It would prohibit the use of shell companies to funnel foreign money to US elections, require government contractors to disclose their political spending, and overhaul the Federal Election Commission to enforce campaign finance law. I want to talk about that last for just a minute. The Federal Election Commission had been unable to function in the 2019 to 2020 period because it did not have a quorum. That built a backlog of 350 campaign finance matters. In addition, appointments were made of people who were clearly ideologically opposed to the mission of the agency and who blocked enforcement of our nation's anti-corruption laws. Even with full membership, the structure of the FEC, which is 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, has always resulted in gridlock, so that very little gets done. And so when they say overhaul, what they mean is adding a 7th person who would be independent, who would break a tie. Excuse me. The ethics section institutes stronger ethics rules for all 3 branches of government. It would slow the revolving door between government officials and lobbyists, expand conflict of interest law, eliminate the use of taxpayer money by politicians to settle sexual harassment claims, ban members of Congress from serving on corporate boards, require major party presidential candidates to publicly disclose their tax returns, overhaul the Office of Government Ethics to ensure stronger enforcement of ethics rules, and require members of the US Supreme Court to abide by a judicial code of conduct. Right now, Supreme Court justices are the only category of judge not currently covered by a code of conduct. Although anti-corruption laws are popular among voters on the left and the right and everywhere in between, corruption has a strong grip on our federal government. Anti-corruption efforts need to overwhelm elected officials with public support. Given the national percentages of political identities, 26% Republican, 31% Democrat, and 38% independent, some of whom lean blue or lean red, no one group can do it alone. It's pertinent to discuss the hyperpolarization of the political parties in Washington versus hyperpolarization of the American people. Some researchers question the magnitude of the political divide among American citizens, and they cite these findings. The percentage of moderates has remained constant since 1974. Over that same period, the self-declared number of independents grew. Data compiled by Morris Fiorina, who'd written a book called Unstable Majorities, shows that a large number of voters say neither party reflects their views. In his words, voters are responders and not initiators in the political process. We can only choose between the candidates the parties nominate. His research is confirmed by a University of Maryland study titled A Not So Divided America. It found that people who live in red congressional districts and people who live in blue congressional districts, so red and blue voters, took opposite positions on only 14 of 388 issues. Many of the most polarizing issues, such as abortion, gun control, and racial equality, rank 19 to 52 points below voters' top priorities. Voters' top priorities are healthcare, the economy, and jobs. Prior to the current hope of federal anti-corruption legislation, Represent Us employed bottom-up strategies. A Bloomberg News study found that throughout our nation's history, passing state laws leads to federal victory when state passage reaches a critical tipping point. Bottom-up strategies for national reform work because the Constitution gives sole control to states over how elections are run, even federal elections. When you change election rules in the states, you can change Congress. Bottom-up strategies begin locally in cities and counties where we have the most control. By first passing local laws, we can change our state, and when we change our state, we can change our country. If HR 1S1 fails, we will need to continue to fight for systemic change at the local and state level with an eye toward federal reform. Here's a bit of bottom-up anti-corruption history. Represent Us passed the first citywide anti-corruption act, again, a comprehensive act in Tallahassee, Florida. And it was led by a group of progressives and Tea Party activists, way to the left and way to the right, who got together, and you can see the donkey and the elephant crossing swords here, crossing American flag swords. And since the passage of the Tallahassee Anti-Corruption Act, there's been a 100% clean sweep of the City Commission. In 2018, voters passed 15 of 16 anti-corruption campaigns on Election Day, bringing the 2018 total to 23. That's the most anti-corruption reforms passed in a single year in US history. They include many tenets of the American Anti-Corruption Act, and they were often passed by large bipartisan majorities in red, blue, and purple states. Comprehensive anti-corruption laws were passed, anti-gerrymandering laws, ranked choice voting, ethics and lobbying reform, automatic voter registration, campaign finance laws, and transparency laws. In 2019, Maine became the 16th state to pass automatic voter registration. New York passed ranked choice voting, which, with the addition of New York, tripled its usage in the United States. New Jersey and San Francisco passed dark money laws. If you haven't heard of any of these laws, this slide is for you. Mahatma Gandhi, who wrested control of his nation from the most powerful empire in the world, commented, Without a paper or a journal of some kind, you cannot unite a community. The Fulcrum provides digital news focused exclusively on American democracy reform efforts. It reports news from across the country on money in politics, redistricting, voting rights, election access, government ethics, civic engagement, and the imbalance of powers. We highly recommend signing up at fulcrum.us. It's free if you're serious about joining the anti-corruption movement. And reading about the successes and reform initiatives going around the country that you don't normally hear about, it can give you hope that our democracy can be saved. As I mentioned earlier, political unity is incredibly powerful. In North Dakota, 2 women, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat, admired each other and decided to seek common ground even though they had vastly different political views. Together, they spearheaded a cross-partisan activist group. The group organized to successfully pass the North Dakota Anti-Corruption Amendment. This legislation is the most comprehensive anti-corruption amendment in US history. It increases transparency, roots out conflict of interest, restricts lobbyist gifts, bans foreign money from elections, prevents the personal use of campaign money, closes the revolving door, and holds public officials accountable. By the way, these 2 women were dubbed the badass grandmas of North Dakota. Many of these past successes I've shared were achieved with ballot initiatives. Ballot initiatives are a form of direct democracy where a petition signed by a certain minimum number of registered voters, it differs by state, can put anti-corruption laws directly to a public vote. In short, it bypasses entrenched politicians so that the voters themselves can make corruption illegal. Thousands of cities and 24 states, these highlighted here in blue, they allow some form of direct democracy. Note that Illinois is highlighted in blue. In 2020, a number of key state ballot initiatives were scuttled by the pandemic. They just couldn't gather the necessary signatures. And prior to that, just as frustrating, in 2019, in response to this incredible reform success in 2018, legislators in 16 states introduced 120 bills to make ballot initiative hurdles more difficult. So direct democracy in Illinois gets a big black X because the restrictions here were already stringent. Although Illinois is technically one of the 24 states that allow ballot initiatives, we, citizens of Illinois, can only initiate structural and procedural constitutional amendments. And the process is so prohibitively difficult that many initiative scholars do not truly count Illinois as an initiative state. Twice, reform groups tried to overhaul redistricting through the petition process, but were struck down by the courts. Let's take a closer look at Illinois corruption, or as some term it, the state where our governors make our license plates. University of Illinois in Chicago publishes a regular anti-corruption report, which is very interesting. Its latest report shares Department of Justice statistics from 1976 to 2019. These statistics rank Chicago as the most corrupt federal judicial district in the nation. Illinois is ranked as the 3rd most corrupt state per capita. Illinois' persistently high conviction statistics support the idea that criminal enforcement alone is not enough to fight corruption in our state. We need to institute the preventive mechanism of government ethics laws. An older 2014 study from Indiana University is worth a look. I like this study because it doesn't just look at convictions, it also examines state spending to develop a corruption index. Illinois ranked 4th on that index. Most important, the study quantified the cost of corruption in the top 10 most corrupt states, of which we're number 4, to average $1,308 per person annually. Just a second. Sorry. The Indiana researchers also found that overall state spending, which you can read as our taxes, is higher in these top 10 corrupt states. Those states spend more on construction, government employee wages, law enforcement, and infrastructure. And they spend less on education, healthcare, and social services. Those categories have less opportunity for private gain. Citizen Advocacy Center assisted veteran political observers Thomas J. Gradle and Dick Simpson in estimating aggregate corruption costs in Illinois at $500 million. And the Better Government Association believes the cost may be in the billions. Attacking corruption in Illinois could bring down state spending with fewer cuts to services that people need. Anti-corruption activists never waste a good scandal. University of Illinois at Chicago's anti-corruption report begins, 2019 was a highly explosive year during which some of the most important political corruption in the history of Chicago and Illinois was exposed. An aggressive FBI probe uncovered an 8-year ComEd bribery scheme. ComEd admitted to providing jobs, contracts, and payoffs to House Speaker Michael Madigan's associates. In exchange, ComEd received $150 million in legislative benefits, including sharp increases in our electric rates. The probe also pursued other Illinois Democrats. Representative Luis Arroyo was charged with bribing a state senator on behalf of his lobbying client. Senator Martin Sandoval pled guilty to taking bribes and filing a false tax return. And Senator Tom Cullerton was indicted on embezzlement for a $250,000 ghost payrolling job with the Teamsters. With multiple corruption investigations in both Chicago and Springfield, lawmakers were under pressure to enact reform. The Center for Illinois Politics created this bar graph breaking down the 87 ethics bills that were introduced in 2019. 2 ethics reform bills were significant. Oh, only 5 of those bills passed both chambers. 2 of them were significant. SB 1639 better tracks lobbying activities. And the second one created a joint commission on ethics and lobbying reform. Governor Pritzker said that he wanted to follow up with a more comprehensive ethics reform package in 2020. A report was due in March 2020, but then the pandemic hit and reform took a backseat. There have been several key developments that will affect whether we see real reform in Springfield. First, the Joint Commission's report was never issued. More troubling was a joint statement by top Illinois political reform groups, Reform for Illinois, Common Cause, Change Illinois, and the Better Government Association, on a lame duck section omnibus ethics bill. Omnibus just means that there was a lot of different things in the bill. And I'm going to read from, they issued this statement that was published, and it just characterizes it perfectly. On January 12th, the Illinois legislature held a hearing and vote on an 87-page ethics bill in the middle of the night at the end of a lame duck session. The bill was introduced with no notice to stakeholders and without the promised public report from the Joint Commission on Ethics and Lobbying Reform. The process flew in the face of transparency, did little to remedy Illinois' reputation as a bastion of closed-room deals and political corruption, and further undermined public trust in state government. So Michael Madigan is no longer Speaker of the House or Chairman of the Democratic Party. The new House Speaker, Speaker Welch, created a special committee titled Ethics and Elections and suggested that the commission's work will inform an ethics reform package intended to pass by May. Senate President Don Harmon has also pledged a commitment to ethics reforms, so we shall see. To date, 22 substantive ethics bills have been introduced in both chambers. Both the Senate and the House have introduced omnibus ethics bills, again, sort of a grouping of different topics. Other bills, some of which duplicate topics, fall into the following categories. General Assembly and local elected officials lobbying bans. Most of those scandals, a lot of them centered on lobbying. So this, I think, we can for sure see. Revolving door bans of 2 to 3 years. an independent legislative inspector general, conflict of interest definitions and prohibitions, General Assembly member prohibition on concurrently serving as a state party chair, and a nepotism bill prohibiting appointing one's spouse, which you don't think you would need, but we do. All of these bills are being evaluated except for the one below, which was marked do pass. Again, so here's that GA member lobbying ban. So a member of the General Assembly, his or her spouse or family members shall not lobby any official of the executive or legislative branch, either in state government or local government. So if that indeed does pass, that's a big deal. So I know I probably threw out a lot of terms. I do want to take a little time to go over why those bills would be so good, what problems they're trying to solve, and how they mean to be a solution. So the first one was the FBI investigations of ComEd, Luis Arroyo, Chicago aldermen that were indicted, hopefully will produce this lobbying ban. And I really think that that's going to happen just because of the number of scandals that were exposed in 2019. Illinois has very weak economic disclosure laws compared to other states. So there were a few bills that were trying to get at a better conflict of interest definitions and expanded statement of economic interests, and I kind of hope that's going to happen. Illinois is one of only 7 states without a revolving door ban. So there were bills introduced in terms of putting in a revolving door from anywhere from 6 months, which is really not long enough. You can sit out for 6 months, and wait out a 6-month ban, to 3 years. Most states have a 2-year ban. The state of Florida recently enacted the longest ban, which is kind of a shocking 6 years. When the Joint Commission on Ethics and Lobbying Reform was taking testimony, former Legislative Inspector General Julie Porter said that 3 of her investigations were squashed by the Legislative Ethics Commission. In Illinois, our Legislative Inspector General has to get permission from the Legislative Ethics Commission, which has been characterized as the fox guarding the henhouse. And so there are a couple of bills in both the House and the Senate to ensure the independence of the Office of Legislative Inspector General. For me, if I could have only one thing, this is the thing I would want, so that, somebody is actually going to be able to investigate corrupt officials. And then the last one is House Speaker Michael Madigan held the dual role of legislative leader as Speaker of the House and also party chairman of the Democratic Party. And when you hold both the purse strings and legislative leader position, you have very concentrated power in the hands of one person. So there's a bill out there that would prohibit a House leadership, or any leadership really, Senate or House leadership, from concurrently serving as a state party chair. When you have that kind of concentration of power, it can result in a rubber stamp legislature because you've got control over who serves on what committee. You can effectively sideline a representative, or you can deny them campaign funding. As I mentioned previously, bottom-up strategies advocated by Represent Us start at the state level to work for national reform and at the local level to pass state reform. Here in DuPage County, we want to successfully lobby the DuPage County Board to strengthen the DuPage County Ethics Ordinance of 2012. DuPage County is the 2nd largest of Illinois' 102 counties, and we can help spur reform efforts in our state. We submitted the following 6 proposals to the DuPage County Board prior to the pandemic, but then when the pandemic hit, other things took precedence. So we do want to resubmit the proposal to the newly elected slate of board members again this summer when we hope things have calmed down and more people are vaccinated. So I'm just going to go over the 6 right now. We also want to, we have an investigator general in DuPage County, and right now that person is appointed by the chairman and the board. So you really don't want people to appoint people who police them. That doesn't make any sense. So we want to ensure the investigator general is independent and effective. We want to limit political contributions from county vendors and political appointees, otherwise known as pay to play. We want to ban conflicts of interest in property tax law. So if you are a property tax lawyer or your firm engages in property tax law, you really ought not to be serving on the DuPage County Board, which is our property taxing body. We want to increase the lobbying prohibition. It's currently 1 year in DuPage County. We want to increase it to 5 years, which would be 1 year more than a term of office. And we would like to limit nepotism and institute penalties for ethics violations. One of my own in Bloomingdale, where I live, somebody took $250,000 bribe to give a state road contract to a firm who never did any work. So, you know, I'd like to see that money back. Anyway, there's a lot of work being done in the democracy reform arena through multiple organizations. In addition to subscribing to the Fulcrum, Represent Us volunteers monitor many of these organizations so we can find out what's going on all around the country. There are two basic national coalitions. Represent Us is part of the National Association for Non-Partisan Reformers, as I mentioned. We try to unite people across the political spectrum. It's mostly centrists and people to the right as well. So Represent Us is cross-partisan. American Promise focuses on the 28th Amendment to get rid of Citizens United. Take Back Our Republic is the most Republican group. So if you're a Republican, that would be the group for you. Bridge Alliance focuses on bridging the partisan divide. Fair Vote works on ranked choice voting. Open Primaries works to seek open primaries so independents can vote in primaries. And Unite America has a fulcrum strategy where they try to elect centrists that would break ties with the gridlock. Declaration for American Democracy is a coalition that goes from the center probably all the way to the far left, including groups like Move On and like Indivisible and things like that. So this tends to be maybe the more central to progressive coalition. Includes Brennan Center for Justice, as I mentioned, Common Cause, Public Citizen, League of Women Voters, many, many others. I think it's like 180 organizations. It's huge. Here in Illinois, we have something called the Just Democracy Coalition. Citizen Advocacy Center, who we worked with to develop the DuPage County Ethics Ordinances right here in Elmhurst. Common Cause has an Illinois branch. The Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights works here. The League of Women Voters is very active in this group. Change Illinois tends to focus primarily on redistricting. Reform for Illinois right now does the Sunshine Database, so they do a lot of campaign finance. They're working on ranked choice voting now. And the Better Government Association is kind of like a news organization, and of course Represent Us. If you want to help pass the For the People Act, here are ways you can help. You can write Illinois Senators Durbin and Duckworth to thank them for being co-sponsors. Our senators are co-sponsors of this, and so, you know, there's nothing for us to press for here. But you can sign the Represent Us petition to demand the Senate pass the For the People Act. You can call friends in other states to urge their senators to vote yes on the For the People Act. So senators with, states with Republican senators, or the two Democratic states we need to work on would be West Virginia and Arizona, if you happen to know people in those states. Use the Represent Us social media toolkit, which includes images and captions to help spread the word and combat that misinformation campaign. If you're really interested in this, you can join Represent Us and volunteer for one of its 3 teams. They have a call team, a text team, and a meme team. And all of these are focused on 2 people, Joe Manchin in West Virginia and Kirsten Sinema in Arizona. We're not calling them, we're calling voters in their districts to get them, and we're patching them through to those state senators. Excuse me. If you want to help clean up Illinois, here's how you can help. You can call both Senators Durbin and Duckworth and mention that, hey, Democrats have a majority in Illinois. You can pass strict campaign finance and ethics laws here to spur the passage of HR 1 S1 and do many of the same things in HR 1 S1 could apply to Illinois. We don't have voting rights problems here, of course, but certainly for ethics and campaign finance, we could use a lot of those same things. You could call your Illinois state senator and representative and tell them that ethics and campaign finance reform are important to you. You can ask them what bills they have sponsored, ask them to be co-sponsored on some of these 22 bills to restore people's faith in Illinois government. You can join the Illinois anti-corruption movement. League of Women Voters, I'm also the money and politics specialist, so I have a Google group through League of Women Voters. Common Cause also has an activist group in Illinois that works on ethics. You can join the email list of DuPage chapter of Represent Us. If you're interested in that, you could put your name and email in the chat and I would add you to the list. I do send out information kind of along the lines of these presentations to update you on what's going on. And if you don't like to get emails, you can just check at your leisure. I do post regularly on Facebook. We have 2 Facebook pages. I'm sorry, we have a page and then we have a group. All you have to do is ask to join the group and you're in. So you can get us on Represent Us DuPage, and my group is Represent DuPage. So, and then last, when it comes this summer, when I hope that maybe that more people are vaccinated, I'm going to re-lobby the DuPage County Board. So you could contact your county board members and ask for updated ethics ordinance. And also it's very effective for any of these people to comment on their social media. They really pay attention to their social media these days. So if you comment on the county board social media or Durbin social media, Duckworth social media, your Illinois state senator, your rep, commenting on their social media is very, very effective these days. And also calling is more effective than writing. So, and that's my presentation. So if you have any questions or would like to discuss anything, you know, I'm here as long as you want to talk.
Well, that was really excellent. You know, I'm going to have to watch a lot of these points that you covered again when we post the video. A lot of very dense information, but really rich and useful too. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
There are a couple of questions in chat, at least a couple of them from me actually.
Okay.
One is, let me scroll back and see what it is about. Was it North or South Dakota? Which one was it?
Oh, South Dakota.
Let's see.
He asked, does North Dakota law only apply to state offices?
Right. You've talked a lot about the progress is made in North Dakota. Does the progress only apply to the state offices and state districting, et cetera?
No, it's an amendment Congress too. They're Congress people too.
Okay. Fantastic. So that means
Donna, I have a question on that.
Yeah.
This is a state amendment to the state constitution, correct?
Yes.
How can that apply to federal offices?
So remember that states have control over federal elections. Remember that from the Constitution. That's what states' rights is about. And that's what the whole controversy over the Joe Manchin, West Virginia thing, that guy
Yes.
said HR 1 would trample on states' rights because states have the right to control their elections for both, not just their state, but for their congresspeople. And that's why if you change election, sorry.
I would say, but that's federal down, which has always been something that's been understood. Again, how can a state constitution have any effect on federal office holders? That's going the other direction. That's going states up and telling them how they should act as far as ethics go, versus HRS or S1, which would be a federal law, which would affect all of the states down.
All the states.
Redistricting is one good example.
I'm sorry?
Again, that's not the same issue. I'm sorry. Redistricting is not the same as is not the same as an ethics section in a state constitution.
Okay.
It's a matter of...
my understanding was that it would also affect the congressional offices, right? But I can look into that and get back to you.
Thank you.
I will find out for sure.
Yeah, so when it says, for example, restricting lobbyist gifts, does that also restrict lobbyist gifts to the Congress people representing that state federally?
Yeah. Well, let me check into that. I was under the impression it would, but I will double check because maybe I'm wrong, but I will check Congress too. Okay.
Yeah, if the answer is positive about that it can, then that's phenomenally powerful to what you're talking about, your sort of ground up movement. If it can put binding rules on federal representatives, that would be quite remarkable.
Well, that's the whole represent us thing. The way it started out was they said, you know, you want to pass these laws in the state because if you do that, you can change Congress because they have jurisdiction, the states have jurisdiction over federal election rules. And so that's why this was trying to be done. And that's why when they did this, all of a sudden you see these 160 legislative bills to make these kinds of ballot initiatives much more difficult so that they can't be used.
At least at the state level.
At the state level, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was the reaction to this success because this was a big deal. And then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, we can't have this in our state, you know? So, you know, we better make these ballot initiatives much harder. So
great.
One good example of showing how the states' rights can't supersede federal would be the ruling to allow same-sex marriage, which was done on a federal level and superseded quite a few states' decisions that they were not going to recognize same-sex marriage.
Right.
That's federal affecting down rather than the state's decisions affecting federal up.
Right. Let me get to, hold on a second, let me go. So if you go here, if you look at, this is actually women's suffrage. And so it points to the fact that, you know, women's suffrage when they first started, they started out pushing, there was kind of a dual federal and state thing going on, but they were getting nowhere federally. So they started going into the states where Wyoming, I think, was the first to give women suffrage. And then there was another state, and then there was another state, and there was a plateau for a long time. And then in 1910, they just started racking up the states. That was the whole tipping point thing, where they changed election laws in all these states, and they started sending women to Congress. And then in 1920, 27 states, you start to hit the tipping point. You're over half of states now have allowed women. And then at that point, it's like, okay, you know what I mean? We can't fight.
Right. But that was because states do have control over their own elections.
Right.
That would make sense on the state level. And then you had enough states allowing women to vote, you know what I'm saying? That when they then introduced the amendment to allow women to vote to the Constitution, then you had enough states. But it's not the same as a state having jurisdiction over federal. It's not, the process isn't quite the same as just saying, well, all these states all of a sudden allowed it, so therefore it became federal. You then had enough states that were accepting women's right to vote, that when the constitutional amendment was introduced, then you had enough states to ratify the amendment.
Right, but H1S1 is not an amendment. Right?
I understand that. But your example is women's suffrage. So I was just talking to that.
Yeah.
And HR1S1 would overturn a lot of states' regulations or legislation on voting, hopefully.
Yeah, it would.
So a related question, again, that it happened to come from me, was it seems like Represent Us is very well funded, and I really like your string of successes that you've talked about, etc. But I'm wondering why it's not more successful. If you've got the public behind you, if you're well funded, if you've got a lot of celebrity endorsements and celebrity participation, where is the pushback coming from? What is the boulder you're trying to push uphill, and what is the gravity pulling that back down? Is it really partisan? Is it just Republicans, or is it corporations actively fighting against Represent Us? What's the you know, the opposing force?
Right. So, I mean, you know, it's really, they talk about this, the system is so entrenched and it's so complex and interwoven that it's very, very difficult. And, you know, getting elected, it just requires money. You can't get elected to change anything unless you have money. That's the way the system has been set up. And so this book, The Politics Industry, I think if you read, there's two books, Democracy in Chains. And, you know, if you read those kinds of things, it talks about all of these problems and, you know, how you really can't get over the fact that, you know, particularly since Citizens United, you know, there's always corruption, but since Citizens United, the money has just taken over and, you know, votes ultimately trump money, but if you don't have enough votes, and if remember that these lobbyists and these people that want to control Washington, they give to both political parties.
Right.
So it doesn't really, you know, I don't want to say it doesn't really matter. It does matter, but, you know, they give different industries give to different parties. For example, the healthcare industry gives to Democrats to stop healthcare reform, because Democrats are the ones that are going to initiate healthcare reform, right? Mm. So, you know, so you have to kind of look at, there's an interesting website called Follow the Money. If you look at Follow the Money and you see which industries give to which parties and which people, you know, Durbin takes a ton of healthcare money, a ton of healthcare money.
Wow.
So, you know, I think you only have these two parties. So I think this duopoly is set up where you just can't break it. And so that's why the politics industry looks at competition theory to break it. And that's why you have these center groups, because, you know, they show that, you know, not many people vote in the primaries. And that's a huge problem. People are sick of politics. I mean, in my last local election, we had 15% turnout, you know, 15%, that's bad. So the presidential election had, you know, incredible voter turnout because it was very controversial. But for primaries, the primary turnouts are usually like 23%. And so voters can trump money, but voters don't understand this and they don't come out. And, you know, I try to make these talks all the time and people just really, you know, shrug their shoulders like, it doesn't affect me, you know? So.
Donna, I wanted to raise another intersectional issue pertaining to corporate lobbying money and corporate taxation. Early in your presentation, you went on, I wish we could go back to that screen, but maybe it's not possible. You talked about a large number of corporations not paying any corporate taxes.
Yeah.
And that just blows my mind. I think it is a fundamental leverage issue. And, you know, the intersectional one with lobbying is that some corporations have all the much more money to lobby with because they're not paying any taxes.
Or they hide their money. Yeah.
So what was the statistic? I wanted to make a note of the statistic about what corporations aren't paying income taxes. What was that?
Yeah, it's here. Can you see it? Or so Amazon paid 0, Chevron, Delta, General Motors, Honeywell, IBM, Prudential Financial, Tech Data. The libertarian watchdog group is called Open the Books. And, you know, they have a lot of data on this kind of thing, and also government waste. They do a lot on government waste because, you know, they're libertarians. So, but, you know, part of this, like not paying taxes, you know, then you're starving the government for money. And, you know, that kind of forces, especially some local governments, to try to start to privatize things because they can't afford to repair things. And, you know, so that's very concerning.
Oh yeah, it's the absolute opposite of progressive taxation.
Right.
And it doesn't even penalize the officers because they're going to get their big bonuses anyway. You know,
right.
All right, did we have any other questions? Feel free to unmute and speak up if you have a question to ask.
I'm not sure what this one says. That's only for the people who are registered, who 15% and less than 30% who are eligible to vote are registered.
Yeah, you were talking about the turnout in the last election. You said there were only 15% turnout.
That's 15% of the only 30% of registered.
Yeah, it was 15% of the people who are eligible to vote are the ones who showed up.
Right, for the local election, for a local election.
Right. Which are always horribly, horribly small. I mean, here in Kane County, we had some people who won by, you know, the whole 22 votes that were cast. You know, yeah. But yeah, I've been a voter registrar for like 30 years, and they drummed into us that less than 30% of the people who are eligible to be registered to vote actually bother to register, which shows how single issue voters can have such a impact when it comes to how elections turn out.
Yeah, but you know, I also think we haven't really talked about this, but a fundamental issue is our media. You know, when people are uninformed about what's going on, they don't vote. They don't know what's going on, so they don't vote. You know what I mean? So this can be sort of, I mean, maybe they can feel their lives are getting worse, but they don't necessarily understand why, you know.
You know, Donna, you've hit on something that I've been pushing for some time. Is I would like to see every county clerk have on their website a bio and maybe like the top 5 positions for each person running for every office, regardless of what the office is, because it's impossible on some of these races to find out what the people who are running, what they stand for, what it is they want to do.
Right.
And I think it should be, if the county clerk is running the election, the county clerk should be able to help inform the public as to who the people on the ballots are.
Right. Yeah. I think the League of Women Voters is having a lot of discussion on what to do about these local races because we want to get more information to the public on them, on why they're important, and feature them a lot more. So I know the DuPage leagues there's six leagues in DuPage, and we also incorporate the one in Kane County because it sounds like you're from Kane. And we're going to try to do a lot more presentations together, all 7 of the leagues. And I think that's one topic, you know, we'd certainly like to tackle.
Yeah, I think that there are so many issues around fair campaigning. A really extreme one would be that independent campaigning would not be allowed. In other words, all of the candidates running for an office would be expected to campaign together, that the newspapers and social media would print the kind of background information that Howard was talking about, and that through debates, town hall meetings, and discussion groups, the people campaigning for a particular office would talk together. Their material would be juried, and so misinformation would be nipped in the bud early.
Yeah.
That is pretty extreme for many people to swallow, and yet if we talk about it more, it could be over time it will be better accepted.
Yeah.
I think maybe John Farmer, did you have a question?
Well, something that's been bugging me for years is basically the primaries. And if you are a red district or a blue district primarily, whoever wins the primary is going to be your candidate. And it comes down to with such low turnout, we're getting like 5 or 7% of the population are determining a representative.
Right.
No matter how well they get out and campaign.
That's why, John, I think you'll really enjoy reading the book, The Politics Industry, because it's based on competition theory. The whole reason we can't make any progress is that, you know, ballot access is limited. If people try to get in that are not approved by the parties, they're kicked out. I mean, and so, you know, that primary process, that open primaries group, they're trying to get all these young people in there because young people are not affiliating with the parties. They don't care anything about the parties, and they're very independent. And I'm talking about the millennials and Generation Zs. And so they're trying to do open primaries with multi-member districts. So it wouldn't be a winner-take-all system. And in ranked choice voting, so if you combine open, so this has happened in Alaska. I should have put Alaska in there. So Alaska just passed open primaries and ranked choice voting, which means that in a primary, I don't, like, so I'm in Illinois, I say when I want to vote in a primary, I want to vote in a Democratic primary, or I want to vote in the Republican primary, right? So in an open primary, it's a blanket open primary. You vote for anybody across the political spectrum, and you rank them in order of who you want first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And so what that does is it makes the elections much kinder, much gentler. It gets rid of the spoiler effect, and it tends to elect these more moderate centrists who can compromise together and bring the voices of all the groups together. And so it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in Alaska, you know?
Again, that's nice, but if you're only getting 10 or 15% turnout for the primaries, you can get a group, you know, vote for one candidate, and all of a sudden it doesn't really represent the district.
Right, but when you start instituting these reforms, people vote more.
Okay.
The voting percentages, when they institute an open primary and ranked choice voting, the voting rates shoot up fairly dramatic. I mean, you know, significantly. And so people start getting more interested when they can rank candidates and they have much more control, and they're not presented with the lesser of two evils. See, that's what happens when it's like we're just responders to whatever they throw at us. So when people can rank candidates and all of a sudden you have tons of candidates, people take more of an interest. You know, it's more interesting. And they might see a candidate that actually reflects their views.
It may help if some way we could get online voting, at least in the primaries. Maybe they won't buy it for the general election. But if people just vote from home, from their computer securely, we could increase the voter turnout for our primaries.
Yeah, well, definitely the mail-in ballots, like the 5 states that have mail-in voting, I mean, their turnouts are way and above other states.
Okay.
So mail-in voting has been shown to increase voter turnout very significantly. It's much more convenient. People can vote whenever, you know.
So that reminds me of another curiosity I had while you were speaking earlier. It sounds like automatic voter registration happens. I've heard some people in the media saying that everybody should be registered to vote when they turn 18, just automatically, because they're, you know, if they are a known American citizen. So it sounds like that is already happening in some states, right?
16 states. We have it. We passed it in Illinois. The problem has been we have not implemented it.
Oh, really?
So we passed a bill in Illinois for automatic voter registration. So you would be voted anytime you went to the DMV and you made an address change, or you, like when you know, when you update your drive, you know, you have to update your driver's license, you know, and so that you're automatically registered whenever you go to a government agency to do something, you know, the post office, whatever. So anytime you update something through a government agency, you're automatically registered to vote. And I believe the, let's see, that group, the Center for Lawyers, I forget the name of that group, and they're suing the state of Illinois for not implementing that bill.
Wow.
And I don't know if the non-implementation might be related to our funding problems. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but I do know that we did pass that bill. We have automatic registration here, but we have not implemented it. So it's not in effect occurring.
Okay.
Donna, I had another question about gerrymandering.
Yes.
How much progress has been made to have independent commissions making the districting decisions and using guidelines that have more to do with natural boundaries and reasonable shapes? And then how does that balance off with trying to get maybe a fair balance of different political parties in a district?
So in Illinois, Change Illinois led the Fair Maps Amendment Initiative from the coalition of which we were a part. In fact, Represent Us gave them $25,000 to push that through. When the pandemic hit, again, you know, that initiative took a hit. And so the deadline is come and gone. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. The Democrats are in power, and it doesn't look like they're going to support an independent commission to draw the maps. The bigger issue is that we don't have census data in time for the date that the Constitution says the map should be drawn. So I think they're sort of not sure what's going to happen. They're going to try to draw the maps without the census data and then figure it out. I don't know. I mean, so we're all kind of in a quandary about what's happening here. In Illinois, gerrymandering tends not to be as partisan. It's a little partisan, but it tends to be more political gerrymandering. In other words, the gerrymandering is done around incumbents' addresses and to ensure incumbency reelection. Or at least it has been in the past. You know, I don't know what's going to happen now with these new people in charge of the leadership committees. So, you know, I shouldn't say that actually, so Change Illinois is still pushing. I did testify at the North DuPage hearing saying we wanted independent redistricting. I mean, they were just like, you know, how do you want to see the maps? Princeton Gerrymandering Project has a tool called Representable, where it can drill down to the census block by block, and you can look at the maps and make suggestions on what you think is fair. So if you are really interested in that topic, I would refer you to Change Illinois. They are the experts on fair maps in Illinois.
Yeah.
Oh, they are doing a Chicago ward remap that might likely pass because Lori Lightfoot is behind that. So that's more likely to happen than, you know, an independent commission in Illinois. But the Chicago ward remapping is, you know, that actually might happen.
All right. Well,
thank you very much for the invitation. I enjoyed speaking with you all. I will look up and let Stephanie know. I'll go double check about the North Dakota amendment and how it affects congressional, you know, ethics and campaign finance.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and then I'll get back to Stephanie, and then she can, you know, let you know or put in the newsletter. Or I can put an addendum in the newsletter. So, and then we'll answer the question that way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This was really informative and a great presentation. Take care, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon and see more progress.
All right. Thanks. You too. Have a nice night.
Thanks, Donna.